umiasa sa iba kundi sa iyo at sa akin ang simula ng pagbabago. Panahon na para bumangon at paikutin muli ng tama ang mundo. Suliranin ng ating lipunan, unti-unting magagawan ng paraan. Sa bagong siglo na ito ng ating mga buhay, tayo'y magsama-sama. Bigyang liwanag ang daan, maging gabay sa lipunan, kailangan ng iyong kamay.
Halika na kapwa Pilipino, halika na kapwa isko at iska.
Taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sa harap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Panibagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo. Ang armas mo ay ang iyong natutunan laban sa karahasan. Ang iyong sandata ay serbisyong sasakip sa mamamayan mula sa kahirapan. Halika na, kapwa mandirigma, magtagumpay kapwa isko at iska. Taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sa harap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Panibagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sa harap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sa harap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay, ang bagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Panibagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Umiasa sa iba kundi sa'yo at sa akin ang simula ng pagbabago. Huwag mong iasa sa iba kundi sa iyo at sa akin ang simula ng pagbabago. Panahon na para bumangon at paikutin muli ng tama ang mundo. Suliranin ng ating lipunan, unti-unting magagawan ng paraan. Sa bagong siglo na ito ng ating mga buhay, tayo'y magsama-sama. Bigyang liwanag ang daan, maging gabay sa lipunan, kailangan ng iyong kamay.
Halika na kapwa Pilipino, halika na kapwa isko at iska.
Taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sa harap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa sandata ay serbisyong sasakip sa mamamayan mula sa kahirapan. Halika na, kapwa mandirigma, magtagumpay kapwa isko at iska. Taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sarap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Panibagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sarap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sarap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay, ang bagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Panibagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Iasa sa iba kundi sa'yo at sa akin ang simula ng pagbabago.
Good afternoon from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Welcome to the second installment of the NSTP webinar series titled Reimagining Community Engagement, a webinar on NSTP community engagement projects. I'm Professor Labor and I'm the OIC Director of the UP Diliman NSTP office. So thank you so much for joining us today, dear attendees from all around the Philippines. Last I've heard, we have a lot of participants and guests in Zoom and of course in YouTube. In behalf of Chancellor Fidel Nimenzo, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs Teresa Payungayong, and the NSTP Diliman Council, I welcome you to this webinar. I hope that all of you have adjusted to the scheme of things as we cruise through this online mode of teaching and learning. To the NSTP implementers, I know that you have been successful in teaching the common modules and have now reached the component course. Sa UP Diliman, nasa huling mga linggo na kami ng semestre at kinakailangang hasain na namin ang aming mga mag-aaral sa pagdidisenyo ng kanilang mga proyekto para maayos nila itong maipatupad sa susunod na semestre. Hence, the nature of the webinar this afternoon. So UP Diliman has invited speakers who we know could provide both students and teachers the right mindset, knowledge, and wisdom on how to plan and implement the community engagement projects in the context of our remote, online, flexible learning frameworks as higher education institutions. Sasamantalahin ko din ang pagkakataon na ito na may bahagi sa inyo na mayroong mga knowledge products ang UP patungkol sa pagtuturo ng mga common at component modules sa NSTP. Maaari niyong i-like at bisitahin ang aming YouTube channel, ang NSTP UP Diliman, para sa mga instructional videos na ito. Mayroon din kaming mga radio program recordings na pwedeng gamitin sa pagtuturo ng NSTP. Bisitahin naman ang NSTP Diliman website sa nstp.edu.ph, or that's nstp.upd.edu.ph, at i-click ang STUP sa home button para ma-access ang mga recordings patungkol sa NSTP. I would like to reiterate the point that as a national university, UP would like to continue to extend all the help that it could to provide to our NSTP implementers from all over the country the best NSTP program possible. So thank you all for being here. Your presence means a lot to us, and thank you for your eagerness to learn with us. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Our first speaker to deliver the first lecture, Fundamentals of Remote and Blended Community Engagement, is a development worker with practice focused on resilience, sustainability, governance, and the Philippine arts. After studying political science at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, she worked in research, risk management, and corporate social responsibility before fully transitioning to development work. France gravitates towards projects to facilitate emergent perspectives and solutions for communities and sectors. She previously developed and implemented projects on behalf of local government and non government organizations, including the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award Foundation, Save the Children, and the PYXERA Global. France has been working for CARE Philippines since 2017 and has led projects in disaster risk reduction, innovation, and emergency response. She is currently the project manager of Increasing the Resilience Towards Natural Hazards, or INCREASE project, funded by the Skyla Initiative. Please welcome the project manager of CARE Philippines, Franceline Jimenez. France?
Hello everyone, isang magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. I'll be happy to share with you some of my thoughts on fundamentals of remote and blended community engagement for NSTP. Next slide, please. In the next 20 minutes in this session, we will explore these questions. What is remote and blended community engagement? Is there a difference between remote and blended community engagement? Are there similarities and differences between remote and blended community engagement with face-to-face community engagement? And lastly, what are the opportunities and limitations of remote and blended community engagement? Next slide, please. A big part of our work is building linkages and relationships with the communities we serve. This is where community engagement comes in. In its simplest terms, community engagement seeks to better engage the communities for us to facilitate discourse and decision making, to support processes, relationships, or implementation, and achieve long-term and sustainable outcomes. Traditionally, we usually see community engagement as the meetings, the face-to-face interactions we do with the communities we serve. But with the COVID-19 pandemic and its accompanying constraints on mobility and contact, we are forced to revisit how we actually do community engagement. And logically, with the technology currently available, we saw the shift from face-to-face activities towards online interaction. Next slide, please. We shifted from physical community spaces to online digital platforms, with or without accompanying face-to-face interaction. And in essence, that is the core difference between remote and blended community engagement. Next slide, please. When we talk about remote community engagement, we refer to activities delivered absent of face-to-face interaction. Blended community engagement, on the other hand, includes limited face-to-face interaction to complement the activities delivered through remote platforms. Next slide, please. In remote community engagement, we rely on webinars or Facebook live streams to deliver talks. We rely on organized video calls to do community consultation, or we even post information and educational materials in community public spaces to support our advocacy activities. We've seen this being done by different groups, whether NGOs or LGUs, and on various topics over the past few months. Next, please. For blended community engagement, on the other hand, there is still a component of offline face-to-face interaction. This can be hands-on community activities after an online training, or a small group meeting where the speakers are present via video calls. We've seen this. We've seen blended community engagement activities in areas where small community gathering is allowed, or if the topic of discussion is still best addressed through a face-to-face meeting. Next slide, please. Whether we go via the remote or blended community engagement route, it is critical for us to be clear about the objectives of the activity, as well as the context of the community. For example, we need to be clear on why are we engaging with the community? What do we hope to develop in the process and through this activity? Bakit nga ba tayo nakikipag-usap or bakit tayo nakikitouch base sa community na to? Second, what modalities and mechanisms work in these communities? Are they digital literate? Or better question, how digital literate are the participants? Can they do Zoom? Or can they do FB Live? Or ang ginagamit lang ba nila ay YouTube live streaming? Can they do chats in these platforms? Also need to answer the question, how can we gather feedback from the engagement? Community engagement is not a one-way street. It's critical for feedback to be provided to us as well, coming from the people we are engaging with. So how do we do this? How do we do gathering of the feedback? Is it through online surveys? Is it through Mentimeter? Q&A sessions after? Meron bang pagbabantay ng mga hashtag sa Twitter at sa Instagram? And lastly, especially for activities where our communities provide insights on how we can improve our implementation of activities, how can we actually respond to their feedback? And not only just respond to their feedback, but also respond to it in a timely and appropriate manner. All of these insights, all of these questions inform the design of our community engagement activity and requires a deep understanding on our part of the people we are engaging with. So, kumbaga, even before we decide whether to do remote or blended community engagement, may mga assignment na kailangan nating gawin, pre-steps na kailangan nating gawin for us to decide which platform works best. These questions inform us if it's best to go via the remote or blended route. But it's critical for us to remember that whether we go remote, whether we go blended or purely face-to-face, good design allows us to be able to meet our objectives, deliver our activities, and gather significant feedback. Next, please. And it is in and this is where, in a way, face-to-face still trumps remote community engagement. As a high context country, we Filipinos communicate not only through words, but also through our body language, our tone, our facial expressions. It's quite hard for us to read facial expressions when there's no camera in a video call, and there's a lag between when we see the video and the audio. And let's also be honest, it's also quite easy for us to mute the other party and listen half-heartedly to virtual discussions. Next slide, please. With face-to-face community engagement, we can easily gauge the reactions, the feedback, the opinions of the community, and act on it on the spot. Since nandun na tayo sa pwesto na kung saan nakikipag-usap at talakayan tayo sa ating community, agad nating nababasa yung kanila, kung paano yung ating mga activities, ang ating mga questions ay nare-register sa kanila or ano yung reaction nila. And dahil madali natin itong nababasa, mas madali nating tayo nakaka-adjust doon sa manner how we deliver our activities, on where we bring our discussions forward. Completing the feedback loop may be easier in a face-to-face community engagement process. Next slide, please. In remote community engagement, there's an opportunity for greater reach, but our limited infrastructure prevents others to participate. The internet may be one of the great equalizers, but not all have access to stable internet. I think lahat tayo over the past few months, consistently may nakaka-experience tayo na kung saan mahina or paputol-putol lang ating internet. Our communities in geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas barely have a mobile signal. And in this geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas, no mobile signal means no internet. The same way, mahal pa rin ang internet services. Our 50 pesos, our internet packs can sometimes barely support webinars and video calls so kung saan we have discussions with the community we're working with. Another alternative platform is using local TV and radio channels to facilitate community engagement activities. Dati uso ang mga call-in radio guestings or guesting sa mga regional local TVs to talk about different issues and gather opinions from the different communities that we work with. But given the changes in media reach of our local networks, this might not be a good platform for us to use to support our activities. Again, completing the feedback loop may also be a challenge through remote community engagement. We're all familiar with the scene zone. Lahat tayo nakaranas na ng scene zone where our private messages or direct messages are read, but usually these are not acknowledged or acted upon. If this is already a big no-no on online engagement, kung nawawalan na tayo ng gana makipag-usap sa mga tao na sinisin zone lang tayo, what more in when we do this or when this is being experienced from a perspective of a community engagement process. Mas lalong nakakawala, mas lalong nahihirapan nahihirapan mag-facilitate ng pagbubuo ng relasyon sa community kapag hindi naaktuhan ng tama at sa tamang panahon ng mga feedback ng community. Next slide, please. Given everything that is happening, it's inevitable for us to use and explore digital tools to support community engagement activities. Hindi na natin matatakasan yung paggamit ng digital and online platforms to facilitate or to do our community engagement activities. And over the past few months, we've been exploring all these tools as we continue the push in our activities despite the restriction we're all experiencing. I think right now the challenge for us is how do we build on the opportunities provided by remote and blended community engagement while simultaneously addressing its constraints. So thank you very much and we're looking forward to your questions later. Salamat po!
Maraming salamat sa iyo, Franz, and see you later sa open forum. Okay, let's proceed to lecture number 2, Characteristics of Effective Remote and Blended Community Engagement. So our second speaker, JC, is a graduate of the BS Electronics Engineering from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. He's also a licensed electronics technician and professional teacher. He is currently taking Masters of Community Development at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. So at present, he works at Teach for the Philippines as Program Manager for Community Engagement and Life Skills. So JC is an advocate for inclusive education and community engagement. So please welcome the Program Manager for Community Engagement and Life Skills of Teach for the Philippines. It's John Cedric or JC Pineda. JC?
Hello everyone. Let me share my screen first. All right, so good afternoon again, everyone. So I am John Cedric Pineda, but you can call me JC for short. For the past 20 minutes, we were able to understand the fundamentals of a remote and blended community engagement. So thank you, Ma'am Franz. And now for the next 20 minutes, I will try to explain to you what is an effective remote and blended community engagement experience. And these are all based from my experience as a development worker and from what I've learned from different experts. So at the end of this engagement, I hope you'll be able to first identify what is an effective remote and blended community engagement, to determine the main factors that affects its success, and lastly, to recognize the common risk and challenges of this setup and how are we going to mitigate them. Pero syempre, bago tayo magsimula, I want this engagement to be a co-created experience for all of us. So during the entire engagement, what I can promise you is that first, I will consult your opinion. your comments or sharing. So magtatanong-tanong po ako, and what I hope that you can do is for you to participate or be involved by responding through our chat box. And lastly, in that way, I hope that we can all collaborate to make this 20 minutes a meaningful experience for the both of us. Okay po ba tayo doon? So kung okay po tayo, pwede po ba akong makahingi ng okay or thumbs up sa ating chat box before I proceed to the next slide? Yan, okay po. Yan, thank you po sa mga sumagot. Ayan, super engaged tayo. Okay. So let's begin by answering this question. So, ayan, nakita ko ang daming nag-like, ang daming nag-okay. Pero I'd like to ask as well, sino dito yung mga nagsabi or nag-post noong December 31, 2019, 11:59 p.m. or yung mga nag-post noong January 1, 2020 na 2020 will be my year, 2020 here I come, or sino dito yung mga nag-ipon ng stickers, ayan, ng Starbucks, di ba? Para makakuha ng planner, para maplano yung travel goals sa 2020. Ayan, sino kaya sa inyo? Okay, yan. So, may mga nag-respond. So, kumusta yung experience ngayon, di ba? So, in the chat box, may question dyan sa screen natin. Ano yung kiniinis ninyo sa COVID-19? Ano yung mga naka-apekto or nagpabago dun sa lahat ng pinlano ninyo initially at the start of the year and then COVID came? Ayan, yan, si Ma'am Emmy may SB planner daw. And then, yan, scam yung 2020, di ba? Ang dami sa ating na-scam talaga. And no human interaction for several months. Yun isa sa mga napakahirap. Walang face-to-face classes, so mga estudyante natin affected. And yan, may excited sana sa dorms ng school, pero ayun, nauwi sa bahay. Limitado ang lakad o pamamasyal, and maraming plans na di nagawa, especially about the school. And lahat to valid, di ba? Hindi naman inasahan na darating tong pandemya na to sa bansa natin. But at the same time, hindi lang tayo apektado ng sektor. Hindi lang tayo apektado ng pandemya na to, pero iba't ibang sektor. Merong mga jeepney drivers na wala ng trabaho, may mga businesses na nagsara dahil sa pandemya, at marami pang iba. And even our education system was shocked because of this pandemic. Pero ngayon, napag-usapan natin kung ano yung nararamdaman ninyo. Ngayong araw na to, gusto kong tanungin din ninyo mga sarili ninyo, ano nga kaya yung nararamdaman naman ng mga tao sa iba't ibang komunidad? Kung bilang tayo nasa bahay ngayon, yung mga sinabi ninyo kanina, yung mga naranasan ninyo, kinakainisan ninyo sa nangyari dahil sa pandemyang ito. Pero sa ngayon, ano naman kaya yung nararamdaman ng iba't ibang tao sa iba't ibang komunidad? Dahil, ayan, sa pag-intindi natin kung nararamdaman nila, that's actually the first step to community engagement. May it be face-to-face or may it be remote or blended. So ngayon, ang daming nadadown dahil sa pandemic, di ba? Ang daming hindi nagawa yung gusto nilang magawa dahil sa pandemya. Kung ganyan nararamdaman nyo, ano naman kayo nararamdaman ng ibang tao sa community? So today, we will go back to one of the basic principles of community engagement. And this principle is that community engagement is meeting people where they are. Pero sa sinabi natin yon, paano nga ba natin tatagpuin yung isang komunidad o yung mga komunidad na gusto nating tulungan sa panahon na yung distansya ay mahalaga, na distansya yung ligtas, and yung distansya ang nararapat. At ngayon, para mas maintindihan natin to, hayaan yung ipakilala ko sa inyo ang pamilyang Esteban. Disclaimer lang po, so sila po yung mga characters po natin, mga katang-isip lamang, pero I hope ma-representa nila yung iba't ibang klase ng pamilya na meron tayo sa mga komunidad. So ito ang pamilya Esteban. So ang mag-anak na Esteban ay isang simpleng pamilya na naninirahan sa Maynila. Si Mang Mando na haligi ng tahanan ay isang driver ng jeep, at ang kanyang asawa na si Aling Vicky naman ang ilaw ng tahanan na gumagabay sa kanilang mga anak. Ang mag-asawa ay parehas na hindi nakatapos ng pag-aaral, kung kaya naman malaki ang pagpapahalaga nila sa edukasyon ng kanilang mga anak. So meron silang 4 na anak. Isa nasa college, isa nasa high school, at yung 2 naman ay nasa elementary. sa isang public school. Pero ngayon, dumating ang pandemya. So sa tingin ninyo, paano sila naapektuhan ng pandemya? Sa tingin ninyo, paano naapektuhan ng pandemya ang trabaho ni Mang Mando bilang isang driver ng jeep? Paano kaya naapektuhan ng pandemya yung edukasyon ng mga anak nila Mang Mando at ni Aling Vicky? At syempre, paano naapektuhan ng pandemya yung pangangailangan ng buong pamilya na to? So, para lubos natin maintindihan yung sitwasyon ng pamilya Esteban, meron tayong isang activity na gagawin. So, subukan nating ilagay yung sarili natin sa sitwasyon ng pamilya Esteban. Pwede mong isipin na ikaw si Mang Esteban o kaya ikaw si Aling Vicky, yung nanay, or pwedeng isa sa mga anak na either kolehiyo, high school, or elementary. And gamit yung chat box natin, answer any of these questions. So, una, kung ikaw ay isang membro ng pamilya Esteban, ano kaya yung nararamdaman mo? Ano yung nakikita mo? Ano yung naririnig mo? At ano kaya yung sinasabi at ginagawa mo? So, i-type niyo sa chat box yung sagot ninyo, pero para madali nating ma-recognize kung alin dito yung sinagot ninyo, pwede nyo ilagay yung letter muna nung question, then your answer. So for example, A, ako ay naniniwala, ako ay nawawalan ng pag-asa. So, yun. Sige, I'll give you 1 to 2 minutes to answer these questions. Ayan, so sabi ni Nelson, kawalan ng pag-asa. A, nahihirapan, may mararamdaman na pagkalito, takot, kawalan ng pag-asa. Self-pity, may nadidismaya, stress, never at ease yung pakiramdam kasi isipin pa paano yung kakainin sa araw-araw at paano makakasabay sa remote learning. So, para sa mga estudyante. Napakabigat sa pakiramdam, loss of control, pain and fear, stress, may nagsasabi ng hopeless, nahihirapan, kawalan ng tiwala sa sarili. Ako bilang si Mang Mando ay talagang mangangamba kung paano ko bubuhayin ang aking pamilya, lalo na sa pag-aaral nila. Yan, salamat po sa mga sumasagot. May mga matatakot sa sitwasyon, stress, so marami sumasagot ng stress, kawalan ng pag-asa. Yan, common theme din natin is anxiety. Yan, malulungkot po sila kasi maraming possibilities na maaaring maka-apekto sa edukasyon ng mga anak at sa kanilang araw-araw na pamumuhay. Confused, worried, and afraid, uncertain, pinanghihinaan ng loob. Nangangamba, fear for the future of the family. Ano kaya yung sinasabi? Kailan kaya matatapos to? Agree, di ba? So, halos lahat naman tayo siguro, ito rin yung tanong natin, kailan ba matatapos tong pandemya na to? And nakakalungkot dahil yung pandemya na ito, hindi lang naman health sector yung tinamaan. Tinamaan din yung iba't ibang sector dito sa bansa natin, particularly education. Kaya may nakarecognize sa inyo na apektado yung pamilya ni Mang Mando, especially yung mga anak sa edukasyon. And syempre, pati yung mga kabuhayan ng mga tao. So, lahat ng to, lahat ng sagot ninyo ay posible. Posibleng ito yung nararamdaman ng pamilya Esteban. Kaya ngayon, nalubos na nating naiintindihan yung kanilang nararamdaman, ibalik natin yung lente sa sarili natin bilang tayo yung mga may nais o gustong maglunsad ng mga programa sa komunidad natin, di ba? So bilang tayo yung gustong mag-introduce at gagamitin yung oportunidad sa NSTP para makatulong sa isang komunidad, sa tingin ninyo, base dito sa mga natukoy natin na posibleng nararamdaman, nakikita, naririnig, sinasabi o ginagawa ng pamilya Esteban, ano kaya yung magiging hamon o balakid para yung pamilyang Esteban ay makasali sa mga programa na gusto nating i-introduce sa community? Ngayon na nakita natin ano yung mga nararamdaman nila, ano yung nakikita nila, at nararanasan nila sa paligid nila, sa tingin ninyo, ano kaya yung posibleng maging epekto nito sa partisipasyon nila doon sa mga community engagement projects na gusto nating i-introduce sa community. At mula dito, makikita natin yung iba't ibang hamon, hindi lamang sa ating mga potential participants, kundi pati na rin sa atin ng mga nag-organize. At ilan lamang sa mga hamon nito ay yan. Una, Papaano nga ba natin mabibigyan ng kapasidad ang ating participants para makasali sila sa project na gusto nating i-introduce? Pangalawa, ano yung mga resources na kailangan nila at kailangan nating i-provide para sa kanila para makasali sila sa community engagement programs? Pangatlo, paano natin masisigurado na safe lahat ng stakeholders natin na involved sa community? And then, how do we secure the interest? Ngayon na ganito katindi yung pinagdadaanan ng mga tao, paano nga ba natin masisigurado na interesado sila sa mga community engagement projects na introduce natin sa community or gagawin natin kasama ng community? And lastly, tayo bilang organizers ng community engagement programs or projects, papaano kaya tayo makaka-adapt sa changing changes, di ba? Ito yung bagong term yun, changing changes or mga pabago-bagong pagbabago na na-encounter natin given the current context of the pandemic. And as mentioned previously, due to COVID-19, different organizations are largely switching to online engagement. Ito yung tinatawag nating remote and blended community engagement. And this online-only engagement creates a digital divide. Ito yung uneven distribution ng access, paggamit, and even impact of information for a large number of people who do not have access to electronic devices and or the internet. So during the time of COVID-19, it's very important for us to bridge the digital divide and engage people who do not have online access. That's why a remote and blended community engagement should be accessible, inclusive, and relevant. Paano nga ba natin masasabi na accessible ang isang community engagement project? So una, dapat masigurado natin yung participants natin, they have the resources to participate in the engagement by conducting asset mapping. Ano ba yung mga resources na available sa community? Ano yung meron yung mga participants natin? Ano yung mga kailangan natin i-provide para sa kanila? And speaking of technology, it is very important for us to take note the 5 A's of technology. First is availability. Available ba to sa kanila or hindi? Next is affordability. Gagastos ba sila para lang makasali sa engagement na to? Or mura ba to para sa kanila? Or wala silang kapasidad na bilhin to? Pangatlo, awareness. Alam ba nila na may ganitong teknolohiya? Fourth is abilities. Alam ba nila kung paano gamitin ang teknolohiyang ito or hindi? And lastly, agency. Meron ba silang kakayahan na i-sustain yung paggamit ng technology na to? And we can do that by crowdsourcing solutions by consulting the people in the community. So napakahalaga na tanungin muna natin sila, ano ba yung meron sila para malaman natin saan tayo mag-meet halfway. So remember, yun yung first ever principle natin in community engagement, to meet people where they are. Next is inclusivity. So it's very important for us to recognize and consider yung equity in doing any community engagement project. So we have to recognize that the people in the community, kahit nasa iisang komunidad sila, they are diverse and we have to empathize with them. Alamin natin kung sila nanggagaling and ma-identify din dapat natin kung ano yung mga gaps in the community and let's help seek solutions on minimizing these gaps. Kaya importante nga na meron tayong way to minimize yung digital divide. And lastly, for them to feel involved, dapat makapag-establish tayo ng community agreements wherein there are decision points that we will include them, especially those decisions na nakaka-apekto sa kanila. And some of the practical ways of practicing inclusivity in doing remote and blended community engagement is number 1, to record online meetings para dun sa pang hindi makasabay sa pacing, di ba? And use of relevant languages, nakakasabay ba sila sa klase ng lingwahe na ginagamit natin? And of course, we have to recognize, to center the marginalized voices. Dapat natin ma-recognize yung privileges of the people in the organizing group. And we also have to understand the level of trust and comfort na meron yung mga participants natin, hindi lang sa technology, pero doon sa relasyon na meron sa atin. That's why it's very important for us to invest in relationship building. So to summarize, it is very important to be attentive to the needs of the vulnerable groups. And lastly, to ensure that we are providing the right support to the community, we have to understand if the opportunity that we are providing and even the method that we are maximizing in engaging them is relevant and sensitive to their needs. Ito ba yung gusto at kailangan ng komunidad o ito ang sa tingin natin ang gusto at kailangan ng komunidad? Magkaibang tanong yon. Are there immediate needs that need to be prioritized? So sa kaso ng pamilya ni Mang Mando kanina, ano ba yung priority nila? And based from that, papaano natin sila tatagpuin? Lastly, did we include contingencies in minimizing the gaps for the community to be able to participate? Nung naglatag ba tayo ng isang proyekto para sa kanila, binigyan ba natin sila ng kapasidad or ng resources para makapag-participate sa community engagement project natin? That's why it's very important for us to consult the members of the community prior to the engagement to identify their needs through community needs analysis or rapid assessment. And lastly, to know the context of the community and ensure the safety of everyone. So to summarize, a successful remote and embedded community engagement should bridge the gaps among the participants, should be sensitive to the needs of the people, and should be anchored on the context that the community is coming from. And that means promoting an accessible, inclusive, and relevant engagement. Because at the end of the day, community engagement is about meeting people where they are. And meeting the community where they are means to consulting their context, involving them in the process, and collaborating with them towards achieving shared goals. Kaya ngayon, base sa napag-usapan natin, iiwan ko sa inyo tong tanong na to. Paano kaya natin matutulungan ang pamilya Esteban? Hindi lamang sa problema na kinakaharap nila dahil sa pandemya, kundi sa pagbibigay sa kanila ng oportunidad na makalahok sa mga programang pangkomunidad. That's all from me, and thank you so much for your active participation and engagement with my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir JC Pineda. Okay, so maraming salamat po for your talk on effective remote and blended community engagement. So we now proceed with our lecture number 3 on model for remote and blended community engagement projects for CWTS. So our speaker, Winona, is an indigenous people's rights advocate who has been closely working with Sitio Anipa, a Dumagat Remontado community in Rizal, through Akyat Para sa Dumagat, a passion project she co-founded with Dumagat community leader Tatay Erning. She is the Philippine delegate to the 2019 Asia Young Activist Researcher in Seoul, South Korea, where she published a research on the case of Kaliwa Dam construction and its impact on Philippine indigenous communities. At present, she works as a program officer for local governance at Kaya Natin, Movement for Good Governance and Ethical Leadership, Incorporated. So let's welcome Ms. Winona Gail Galvez.
Thank you, Prof. Giovanni. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the NSTP Pitliman office for the invitation. Today, I will be sharing 2 models of remote and blended community engagement, which I hope may be helpful as we teach and implement civil welfare training service. I agree with the previous speaker, yung sabi ni JC, community engagement is meeting people where they are. So I would like to share 2 of the projects that I've been involved with. So given our context this year due to the pandemic and consequent calamities, the organizations that I work with and am a part of have re-strategized the way we engage with different communities. These models are initiatives of Sandaang Akyat Para sa Dumagat, a group of youth advocates for indigenous people. And the other initiative is by Kaya Natin Movement for Good Governance and Ethical Leadership. You may have been familiar with Bangon Luzon because it's the recent drive that we are in partnership and in coordination with the Office of the Vice President, Lenny Robredo. So, what are the first model? Sandaang akyat para sa lumagat. These are our key considerations why we pursued a blended engagement with the community. Firstly, it's because the community lives in one of the Sierra Madre Mountains in Rodriguez Rizal. So travel is restricted and there are a lot of health risks. And largely, it's because we have been working with the community in the past years at saka rin namin nalaman kung ano ang naging impact ng lockdown sa kanilang income at livelihood. So the community is composed of 50 Dumagat Remontado families called Sitio Anipa, mga katutubo sila. Ang main source of income nila is community-based tourism. So they work as tour guides, yung iba ay mga bangkero, o nagluluto at nagtitinda ng mga pagkain. Before the pandemic, we engaged with them through Akyat para sa Dumagat. These are hikes organized on a monthly basis to help increase the livelihood opportunities for the Dumagat. And it also serves as a platform for mutual understanding because after every hike, there is dialogue with the community where they share their culture, tradition, and identity. And since the hikes could no longer push through, we recalibrated Akyat para sa Dumagat, which then, after the pandemic, or ngayon, sa panahon ngayon, naging Sandaang Akyat para sa Dumagat. We utilized the online platform so the general audience can advocate, share our pub mats, connect with us, yung mga organizations with similar advocacies, and support, of course, the initiative through monetary donations. So what we did, nakita namin na meron na talagang donor fatigue. But what we found out is kapag nag-explore tayo ng more creative ways and use our tools para mas maging attractive donors, ay supporta talaga sila sa cause. So for Sandaang Akyat, gumawa kami ng support tiers and akyat tiers. So there's a specific package which donors or supporters can avail. For support tiers, pwede nilang maklaim yung donor reward, which is yung email updates and support from the community kapag nag-donate sila nitong donation range. And for the akyat tiers, ito na papasok yung Sandaang Akyat because our goal is to sell 100 hiking slots para ang part ay makakaakyat sila dun sa bundok after the pandemic kapag safe na sa protocols, and they could also support the community. So for every akyat tier sold, makakapunta na sila sa bundok with the Dumagat at makakasupport pa sila sa community for 2 to 3 months ng food packs. So, tapos na yung initial fundraising. We raised more than our goal. So, we were able to provide 4 months worth of food packs for the community since they could no longer pursue their livelihood of community-based tourism. This is our way to support them as they try other sources of income. So 8 months into Sandaang Akyat, the 4-month humanitarian assistance helped stabilize the community after matigil ang kanilang livelihood during lockdown. But beyond this, Sitio Anipa has also re-established their agriculture industry because it is a lost practice since they started pursuing tourism. And more importantly, the initiative has cultivated a new community of allies and advocates for IP rights and welfare. So ito po yung ilan sa mga opportunities for replication. Yung Sandaang Akyat, it's still ongoing and we plan to pursue this until the next year. So pwede nating tignan na pwedeng i-replicate in CWTS. First is social intervention. Since maraming nagdaan na ng mga sakuna and of course the COVID-19, kailangan talaga ng community itong intervention na to. So we are also doing these initiative na kinoconnect namin yung mga community leaders with experts on social intervention. And we also assist sa pag-provide ng mga tools na kailangan doon. So for example, for the children, nag-consult kami sa child's rights experts at paano ba natin ma-aid yung distance learning and paano matuturo mga bata kung ano yung nangyayari ngayon. So for the meantime, nagko-conduct kami ng fundraising drive para naman sa storybooks ng mga bata. And another opportunity for replication is the technical assistance. Since yung Tatay Ernie, yung community leader sa ANIPA, siya din yung IPMR or IP's mandatory representative para siyang isang barangay kagawad sa community. And since online na lahat, sana wala silang access doon, so kami bilang pinagkatiwalaan kay admin, ay kami rin yung nag-a-assist sa mga necessary documents at kapag may mga kailangan na project proposals na kailangang i-email, kami yung gumagawa nun for him and for the community. And lastly, I think ito din isa sa mga pinaka-importante ngayong remote and blended engagement is the network and communication support. So since yung community ay nakatira sa isang bundok, remote area talaga, we coordinate news and updates sa mga recent na policies since hindi sila masyadong nakakakuha ng balita from government institutions like the Department of Tourism and DENR na helpful for their livelihood. So kami yung nag-coordinate with them through SMS kasi ang community leader ay merong access to a phone, nagpupunta siya sa baba. So kahit konti lang, we were able to provide communication support for them. And another model or initiative that I'd like to share is Bangon Luzon. So ito yung initiative ng Kaya Natin Movement and Office of the Vice President. Its initial goal is to provide relief assistance. Pero nung lumoko na yung donations, nag-pursue din kami to assist in rehabilitation efforts for typhoon victims. So we decided to pursue this because we have ongoing capacity building programs para sa local officials, particularly sa mga mayors and young legislators. So that connection also helped us para mas mapadali yung coordination on the ground. Yeah. So some of the typhoon hit communities are from the Bicol region, Cagayan Valley, and sa Quezon Province. Upon initial assessment, their immediate needs were food, beddings, and medicine para sa mga may sakit at kailangan ng maintenance. But also, in our rounds on the ground, nakita rin namin na kailangan talaga ngayon ay yung pag-settle nila sa mga settlement areas. Kailangan magtayo climate resilient na mga bahay. And also, preparing the community emotionally at kung ano yung mga dapat nilang paghandaan sakaling may susunod na sakuna. So these are some photos ng aming relief operations. The first one is in Sitio Bacal here in Quezon City, nabaha rin sila. The other is ito namang pag-distribute ng hot meals sa Cagayan. So these are all funded by the public. Lahat ay galing doon sa donation drive. So we started this donation drive last November 2 and we ended it last November 30. So in less than a month, we raised over 70 million pesos. Kami rin overwhelmed with this amount, but we believe that people really are looking for opportunities to help kaya dumami ng ganito. So nag-na kami the first phase, which is relief assistance, yung mga pagbibigay ng food packs, beddings, and all, yung mga immediate needs na we are geared towards rehabilitation efforts o yung housing projects. Yeah. So these are some photos of our distribution. The first is in Quezon, the other is in Labo, Camarines Norte. So ito rin, we consult the local government units kung ano ba yung mga kailangan na materials. So yung iba ay kailangan talaga ng mga plywood, yero, and yung mga sa remote areas naman, ang request din nila ay yung mga pawid. So we also try our best to consult the community para hindi lang kami yung nagbibigay o nagde-decide kung ano yung kailangan nila. But it's also hearing from the people kung ano talaga yung kailangan. So, ang opportunities for replication for the Bangon Zone Initiative is for the Adopt Barangay project. This is a pilot project of local government unit in Albay, yung Tacaco. What they do is they connect civil society organizations na interested tumulong sa mga housing projects. So ito rin, merong consistent communication line with the community. Kahit ilang pieces of yero or ilang pieces of plywood lang yung maibigay, ay makikita din yung progress. So, merong before and after para ma-aid talaga yung community sa kanilang pagbangon from the typhoon. So, yung Adopt a Barangay project, hindi lang siya limited sa pagbigay ng housing materials, but I think a lot of LGUs are also open to any kind of assistance. So, yung nabanggit ko kanina na psychosocial intervention, that can also be adopted dito sa project nito. And another opportunity is capacity building for community leaders. Kami ginagawa na namin yun for elected officials. But we also see the need na makapacitate din yung mga community leaders, especially on a barangay level. So we can bring in experts from different fields, public health, community rehabilitation, sa any field na kailangan na mag-collaborate with the community. That can also be done through an online setup at blended because we can always send people on the ground to do the program. Yeah. So I would also like to share to end this presentation some of the highlights in working with communities in today's context. Ito ay lessons learned na from working on the ground, pero mas napaigting pa at na-magnify in today's context na hindi tayo nakakapagsalamuha ng mga tao sa communities. First is the idea of collaboration. Nabanggit na rin na previous speakers that kailangan pakinggan talaga yung communities. So partner communities should always have a stake, and all stages of the project must be deliberative. For instance, doon sa mga housing projects, hindi lang basta binibigyan ng kung ano-ano, pero sila rin tinatanong ano ba yung gusto nilang bahay na itayo, saan, okay ba sila dun sa lugar, sa placement. So, doon din sila yung gumagawa ng sarili nilang bahay. So, really a partnership with the community, and we should always identify ano ba yung strengths ng community at tatapat natin yun sa kung ano yung available na resource with us para there's genuine collaboration. Another highlight is connectedness. Dun sa lesson namin for these initiatives, hindi mo naman talaga kailangan i-provide lahat ng resources or mag-mobilize all the time. Oftentimes, ang kailangan lang ay linkages or connect sa ibang sektor. So we can always be a weaver para i-build yung connectivity lines among different people in different communities. And lastly, and I think most important, is we should all ideate long-term. Sa mga projects for CWTS na i-implement, yes, limited tayo to this kind of setting na online and remote. But we should always think na dapat yung online efforts must be delivered and envisioned to take place on the ground. So the sense of realism, pero may konti pa ring optimism, we should always think that our projects that we will be proposing can happen and should happen real time at nandun din tayo. So of course, observing protocols, magagawa rin naman. But we should always ideate long term. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time. I hope na yung dalawang initiatives yun could give you an idea on what projects to implement for community engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Maraming salamat, Ms. Sinona. So, good discussion on models for remote and blended community engagement for CWTS. All right. So, later on, please join us again for the question and answer. All right. So, we move on to lecture number 4, this time for community engagement projects for LTS. So, we have Sir RJ Belen, who is a licensed professional teacher and a graduate of public administration at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He was a student leader in his university years, serving in the UP Diliman University Student Council for 2 consecutive terms. RJ has always been passionate about empowering people through education. He was a teacher fellow of Teach for the Philippines, where he devoted 2 years of his life teaching in the far-flung community of Parangluba Elementary School in Siayan, Zamboanga del Norte. Currently, RJ is an alumni ambassador of Teach for the Philippines to the Planning Service Department of the Department of Education Central Office. He's also the co-founder of Super Reader Squad, an organization that promotes literacy at home. Ultimately, RJ dreams of an excellent, inclusive, and relevant education that is within the reach of those in the grassroots. So let's all welcome Mr. Reynald J. Belen.
And magandang hapon po sa lahat. I-share ko lang po yung screen ko. Ayan. So maayong hapon sa tanan. Magandang hapon po sa lahat. I hope that we are all safe and sane despite the pandemic and the recent typhoons that have hit our country. So I entitled my presentation for today, Leading Change, because I'll be sharing with you how our organization is leading change in our partner communities. And I hope also that at the end of this session, you'll be able to lead change in your respective communities when you think of a project or when you start implementing your project for your NSTP class, particularly sa LTS po. Again po, ako po si Reynald G. Belen, but my students fondly call me Sir RJ. So na-share naman na po kanina yung introduction ko, but siguro I'd like to highlight ito pong pangatlo that I co-founded an organization called Super Leader Squad because our discussion for today will revolve around that organization. So ang Super Leader Squad po ay isang komunidad ng mga guro, ng kabataan at pribadong individual na nagsusulong na ang kasanayang bumasa ay dapat isang kasanayan na malayang natatamasa ng bawat batang Pilipino. And isa po sa aming mga proyekto ay ang My First Teacher na nabuo lang nitong March 2020, dulot na rin ng pandemya na ating kinakaharap. So isa po itong capacity building program na naglalayon na mabigyan ng kaalaman, kasanayan at kagamitan yung ating mga magulang upang makapagturo ng pagbasa sa bahay. So what I'll be sharing with you is both a remote and blended community engagement project because yung implementation po ng My First Teacher really depends on the context of our partner community. And for this session, we'll be answering 3 questions. First is, why My First Teacher? So bakit ito bang proyekto na to yung naisipan namin? Second question that we hope to answer is, what were our considerations in crafting and implementing My First Teacher given na may pandemya po tayong kinakaharap? How did we mobilize people? How were we able to reach communities despite yung challenge ng mobility brought about by the pandemic? And the third question is, how can your NSTP class adopt My First Teacher? Or not necessarily adopt the project, but how can you adopt the principles and considerations that we use in implementing your own LTS project? So these 3 questions are what we hope to answer at the end of this very short session. So let's try to answer the first question. Why My First Teacher? So sa 2 taon po ng pagtuturo ko sa pampublikong paaralan sa Zamboanga del Norte po, namulat ako dun sa kapangyarihan na maaaring matamasa ng isang batang Pilipino kapag marunong siyang bumasa. Kasi kapag marunong kang bumasa, nabibigyan natin yung isang bata ng pagkakataon na matuklasan yung mundong kanyang kinagalawan at makita ito sa ibang lente. At ito yung bit-bit nating hangarin nung pumasok po tayo sa taong 2020. We were full of excitement and hope na ang lahat ng batang Pilipino ay makakabasa. Pero nung tinamaan tayo ng pandemya, humarap po tayo sa maraming balakid. Paano na? Yun yung tanong natin. Paano na yung mga estudyante namin na hindi pa marunong bumasa o hirap pang bumasa? How will they be able to cope with the demands of distance learning? Sino na yung gagabay sa kanila? At sa pagbabalik tanaw namin, naalala po namin yung mga magulang katulad ni Nanay Rosaline at Lola Angelita na nakilala namin sa pampublikong paaralan. Itong mga magulang na to ay gustong magturo ng pagbasa sa bahay sa kanilang mga anak, pero hindi sapat yung kanilang kaalaman at kagamitan kung paano. At dahil po doon, nabuo ang My Phrase Teacher. Ito po yung bakit ng My Phrase Teacher. Bit-bit natin yung bawat kwento ng mga estudyante at ng kanilang mga magulang na ating nakilala. Layunin ng proyektong My Phrase Teacher na kilalanin yung pagiging unang guro ng mga magulang sa tahanan. And we do My Phrase Teacher sa pamamagitan po ng 4 na paraan. Una, we provide parents with reading materials and resources for free that they can use at home. Second, we facilitate training and seminars to parents, teachers, and even to our community partners. Online man po or face-to-face depending on the community. Third is we forge partnerships with different organizations, private individuals, and school administrations who share the same advocacy for reading for us to be able to reach more communities. And lastly, we call for donations to support the expenses of the program. But how did we come up with My Phrase Teacher? Ano ba yung mga bagay na pinag-isipan namin in crafting and implementing My Phrase Teacher? Lalong-lalo na po ngayon na in these trying times na may banta ng COVID-19 at halos remote lahat, how did we implement My Phrase Teacher? And I think when it comes to parameters to have a successful and smooth implementation of our project, we need to take these things into consideration. First is creativity and innovation, effective use of resources, replicability, and most importantly, the impact of the project or the program. And looking back, hindi rin naman po naging smooth yung implementation namin sa una. Ang dami pong balakid, ang daming challenges along the way given nga na may pandemic. And some of these parameters that I'll be sharing with you one by one later, na-realize na lang din po namin sa latter part of our implementation. And I think that's okay. Kasi ang importante naman po ay we try to improve based on the feedback we receive from our communities. We try to constantly look for things we can improve on. So pag-usapan po natin isa-isa. So when we talk about creativity and innovation, we are talking about new technologies being applied or introduced. And when we crafted My Phrase Teacher, we introduced the Marungko approach and the Marungko booklets to a majority of parents and even teachers who were not familiar with it. Hindi na po siya, it's not entirely a new concept kasi ginagamit naman na po ito ng DepEd, and this is also the recommendation when it comes to resources in teaching reading. But to some, it's an entirely new one. Mayroon na rin pong mga Marungko books before yung DepEd, but yung bago po siguro dito sa Marungko booklets ay booklet type siya. So meron pong mga activities sa loob ng booklet. So we made it easier for kids to use and for parents to use din as well because it serves as a guide for parents in teaching reading. And itong mga booklets po na we shared to our beneficiaries ay itong mga booklets din na ginamit namin nung kami ay reading teachers na nagturo sa public school, and we found them really effective. So when the pandemic happened, we looked for ways where we could share our reading resources. So we provide our beneficiaries each with a reading kit that is composed of the following. So may reading booklets, basic school supplies, and a teaching guide for the parents. And apart from the reading booklets, kasi with the demands of distance learning where everything happens online, di ba, or remotely, we also made tutorial videos for parents to watch on YouTube or Facebook so they can learn strategies on teaching reading at the comfort of their home. So we utilize the power of social media in reaching more parents. And this is the innovation that we introduce through My Phrase Teacher. Kung iisipin po natin, hindi naman po siya breakthrough innovation na bagong-bago. Diba? It's more of an incremental innovation because we just built on the resources that we already have. But still, it's an innovation. The next parameter that we took into account ay yung resources po namin on how we are going to use it not just effectively but also efficiently. And we know na resources somehow yung make and break ng isang project. Kasi when we talk about resources, this includes our financial resources. Saan ba manggagaling yung budget? Magkano yung kailangang i-raise? Diba? So what we did in My First Teacher, nagkaroon po kami ng call for donations. And during the first call, we were able to raise more than 80,000 pesos. Then the second call, we had more than 120,000. And all in all, we were able to raise more than 200,000. And itong pera po na to, we used to support the expenses of the program. But resources does not only mean financial resources. When we talk about resources, this also includes human resources, political resources, di ba? Who are our local supporters? Sino yung mga tao po na pwede nating itap para matulungan tayo to raise funds, to reach more communities? So what we did, we tapped people we know in different communities and capacitated them in implementing My First Teacher in their own community. For some of our communities, we also provided them with the implementation budget. But we were overwhelmed with the number of youth organizations, school admins, and even private individuals who personally reached out to us because they also wanted to do the same in their community. So we held a series of training for trainers for them to know the specifics of implementing My First Teacher. And for majority of those training, it's online kasi mahirap nga po yung mobility. But meron din naman po mga face-to-face but still following the health protocol. So it really depends on the context of the community. And that's also part of effective use of resources, di ba? On how we network with similar organizations to realize our vision. And that also helps us in expanding our project. So we're done with creativity and innovation, effective use of resources. So now let's talk about replicability. And this involves us asking ourselves, does our project have potential to grow? Can it be replicated by other groups? Pwede ba natin siyang magawa sa ibang komunidad? At yung nakikita nyo po sa larawan ngayon, yan po yung CBOL, isang youth organization sa Tarlac. Isa po sa mga organisasyon na kaisa namin sa pagsulong ng pagbasa. So pagkatapos po ng mga unang implementation namin ng My First Teacher in some of our partner communities, minessage po kami ng CBOL, if they could also do the same in their own community kasi nakita nila sa Facebook yung My First Teacher. So what we did was we empowered them by sharing our resources to them and by holding a series of orientation and training on how they would implement My First Teacher. Our communication channels also remained open to any of their concerns and questions. And dyan po sa picture na feature pa po sila sa isang news channel. And kasama din po natin yung Zambayani sa Zambales. Meron din pong youth organization sa Batangas, yung Akla Tahanan. At iba pang mga youth organizations na nakasama natin sa pagsulong ng advokasya natin sa pagbasa. And I think all these examples are a testament to the replicability of our project, My First Teacher. And nakatulong po yun sa kabuuan ng proyekto namin kasi madali siyang magawa, madali siyang ma-replicate. So we were able to not just empower youth organizations but also reach more communities across the country kasi hindi naman po talaga namin kaya ng kami lang. It takes a village to implement projects like this. So we are very grateful to all the organizations, school admins, and private individuals we worked with and we are working with now. And now, for the final parameter, and I think for me it's the most important, it's the impact. How do we measure the impact of our project? So who benefited from the program? Ano ba yung kakulangan o pangangailangan sa komunidad na pinupunan ng My First Teacher bilang isang proyekto? So for us to measure the impact of our project, we use these reading assessments. So kaka-roll out lang po actually namin nitong pre, mid, and post-reading assessments. So 3 klase po ng assessment to be conducted by our community partners. So right now, we are now awaiting the results of these assessments. So para makita po namin kung may pagbabago pa talaga dun sa level ng pagbasa ng bata. And we have also reached more than 2,500 parents in 40 communities across 17 provinces in the country. Our tutorial videos on both Facebook and YouTube have already garnered almost 400,000 views. And patunay po ito na maraming magulang yung gustong magabayan yung kanilang anak sa pagbasa pero kulang lang talaga sa kagamitan at sa kasanayan. At yun po, and I think that's the gap that we are trying to fill in through My First Teacher. Gusto po natin na mas marami pa yung magulang na kaya at gustong magturo ng pagbasa sa bahay. We want to create positive learning experiences at home. Kasi kung iisipin po natin, yung tahanan naman talaga yung unang paaralan ng mga bata at yung mga magulang nila, yung kanilang unang mga guro. At gusto nating kilalanin yun. But at the end of the day, our hope in My First Teacher, our hope in Super Reader Squad is to cultivate a love of reading among kids and their families. Gusto po natin bumuo ng isang komunidad na ang lahat ng batang Pilipino ay nakakabasa at his or her expected grade level. Hangad natin ng isang bansa na ang pundasyon ay ang literasiya ng bawat mamamayan. And we hope to do that by giving every Filipino child the power of reading. So we hope to reach more communities and we hope that you can be of help to us in realizing that vision. So if you want to partner with us or to know more about the work that we do, you can reach us through any of the following channels. But if you have a different LTS project in mind, that's completely okay. I think it's important, ang mahalaga lang naman po, we think about these parameters when we craft our project. Una, what new technologies are we trying to apply or introduce? Pangalawa, what will be our resources? Who will be our resources? Pangatlo, can this project be replicated by other groups? And panghuli, what gap or need does the project try to fill in the community? So remember these things when you start thinking about your LTS projects, when you lead the change in your communities. And let's continue advocating for and investing in the education of every child, of every Filipino child, because if there's one thing that my years of experience in teaching and community building have taught me is that the fight against education inequity, no matter how long and difficult, is a fight that is well worth our efforts, and it's one that we can win. So together, let us lead the change in making excellent and relevant education within the reach of those in the grassroots. Because our public school students and our education system as a whole deserve nothing but the best. So maraming salamat po at muli magandang hapon.
Maraming salamat, Teacher RJ or Chur RJ. Salamat po. At sa inyong binahagi, sa pagpapaliwanag at paglilinaw ng community engagement on remote and blended modes, particularly on the LTS component. Salamat po. At mananatili po si Chur RJ until the end of the webinar to answer questions. Okay, so we move to our next lecture on the model and remote blended community engagement for ROTC. So our speaker, Dr. Rodrigo Angelo Ong, is an accomplished medical professional and lecturer in the field of healthcare systems management, primary care sports medicine and trauma management, sports science, traditional Chinese medicine, biochemistry, and nutrition, among others. He is a valuable resource person on the science behind COVID, providing advice to government and private organizations on effective COVID response. He has produced a series of policy papers about the pandemic on assessment and forecasts from lockdowns implemented in the National Capital Region and other COVID hotspots in the country with the UP Octa research team. He is a registered chemist, registered physician, a fellow of the International College of Surgeons, UP Octa Research Group, and International Network for Government Science Advice. Finally, he holds the rank of Commodore of the Philippine Coast Guard Auxiliary. So let's listen to the lecture of Dr. Ong.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to all the participants of this special webinar hosted by the NSTP of UP Diliman. No? So I have been invited to talk about community engagement or stakeholder engagement in the paradigm of the ROTC. No? So with this webinar, it's a short 15-minute lecture. We're going to look at how you can help, how you can be of assistance to your communities, no, during times of crisis. And specifically in this lecture, we'll be talking about some of the activities which I did for the COVID-19 and for the disasters of Typhoon Rolly and Ulysses when I coordinated with the uniformed services and of course our ROTC in UP Diliman. So we have to organize ourselves. No? We have to organize the community. No? We have to work together, not to achieve social change. No? We have to organize ordinary people, no? So that they can do extraordinary action. No? So together, no, as individuals, we can do ordinary things as individuals, but with ordinary people get together, they can do extraordinary achievements or feats. No? Now, organizing entails empowering people, no? Building awareness, establishing self-reliance, building relationships, developing organizations and leadership, and enabling communities to take action. So these are all part of stakeholder engagement and community organizing. No? So so perhaps now you can see how you can contribute, no, in empowering your community, no, building awareness for instance, no. So you have social media, no, a very powerful tool to build awareness on COVID-19, no, build awareness for people to appreciate science, no, the science of the pandemic, no? um, to establish self-reliance in the community, no, building relationships. So all of these, no, you can have a role in community organizing, even though you are in the confines of your home or you have limited movement in your communities. No? Now, how can you help in this time of crisis? No? So, as students, or for many of you who are studying at home, listening to me and watching this webinar, no, we can all consider ourselves as informal volunteers. No? So, a formal volunteer means that he is under an organization which has been formed, no, to provide a specific assistance, such as the Red Cross. You know, the Red Cross is very active in disaster relief. It's also very active in promoting blood donations. No? So um, they are called formal volunteers, those who belong to a formal organization. No? But for most of us, who don't belong to any organization. No? We are called informal volunteers. And we are a very, very important source, a resource, no? A very important resource to address disaster response. No? So informal volunteers can lighten the burden of the disaster operations personnel so that the latter, the personnel, can focus on specific actions that they are specifically tasked to do. An example would be a rescuer or someone who is trained to extricate people from under the rubble, no? Or if there was a landslide or if a building has collapsed, a person who is trained to extricate victims from under the rubble, no, should focus on precisely that task, no, to help people get rescued from uh, underneath rubble. No? Sometimes, because there are very few rescuers in the area, no, they are tasked to do other things. Huh? They are tasked to do some administrative and paperwork, or they are tasked to do to maintain the the quarantine facility or to maintain or to help man the evacuation center, no, but their skill is with extrication, no. So when informal volunteers come, no, they can help manage the evacuation center so that the rescuer can focus on his uh, specific action, which he is trained for. Volunteer management may also include training of informal personnel. So, if you are knowledgeable in first aid, you can train informal personnel in first aid. No? So, as UP students in NSTP, one of the common module, of course, is learning to save lives, CPR. So, in the community, um, you can help train your community in life-saving techniques. No, now you can do it through a webinar, no, or you can do it online, no, or to teach your community volunteers in saving lives. No? This will allow informal volunteers to take up a more specialized but non-mission critical tasks. No? So, if you have the opportunity to volunteer in for example, in an evacuation center after a heavy storm like Ulysses or Rolly. No? Informal volunteers can help manage the food distribution. No? These are non-mission critical tasks, no? But very, very essential nonetheless. No? You can help distribute uh, relief goods. No? Again, non-mission critical tasks, but very, very essential nonetheless. No? These may include the community hazard identification and documentation of monitoring devices and readings and outputs. So when I put this line here, it means that as citizen volunteers or as informal volunteers, we can help identify which areas in the community need attention. No? For example, a fallen tree. No? So you can observe in your area if there are areas which have trees blocking the road. You can point this out to the proper authorities so that the road can be cleared of debris. You know, when you see a family who has not received their relief goods, no, you can inform those who distribute the relief goods. So food and clothing and blankets and water can be given to them. So as informal volunteers, you actually, even though your actions may seem trivial, no, may seem unimportant, no, every little thing counts. No? So even identifying hazards, or here when I say documentation of monitoring devices, no, I'm talking about students who are scientists or College of Science students or engineering students who know how to monitor seismographs, for example. No? They can help document uh, these monitoring devices. Now, during COVID-19, I had a drive to protect our frontliners, and I called upon some of my friends, alumni, and faculty, and some students from the UP, and UP students actually, or organizations, UP student organizations such as the Red Cross, UPRCY, etc. No, they actually also want to help. No, but they know that they cannot go out of their homes, no? Because at that time, during this time when I took this PPE drive, it was the height of COVID. No? So what we did was we students donated uh, uh, PPE suits, masks, no, face shields, and they contacted me to deliver these goods to the hospitals, no, to the frontliners. So what I did here, because we had uh, tens, scores, hundreds of bags of PPE, which we had to deliver to different hospitals all over Metro Manila. No, I called my network with the Philippine Coast Guard to deliver these goods. No? So um, when you want to assist, no, but cannot uh, be out, no, to actual groups such as the Philippine Red Cross, no, and sometimes even your church, can help in distributing these goods. Now, later this year, you know that we had two strong typhoons, Typhoon Rolly and Ulysses, no, and again, no, student organizations wanted to help, and a lot of relief goods poured in, no, and those residing near the UP Diliman campus, no, of course, practicing strict physical distancing and wearing of masks, no, went to the DMST to repack these relief goods. No? So others delivered their their relief goods. You have here some of the UP ROTC cadets sorting and bringing in the relief goods from donors, no. And to the left here, you have some UP alumni, recent graduates of UP, no, um, donating relief goods, no. So um, the new normal really dictates that we have to have partnerships. No? We have to have stakeholder engagement. No? We engage other people, no? With certain skills. We engage other people with certain capacities, like the ones with vehicles, no? To deliver the goods, right? For us to be successful in achieving the goal of alleviating suffering, no, of the people who have been hit by the two strong typhoons. No? So, one of my last messages here is in the message of science communication. No? So, here I made this slide in the context of COVID-19. No? So, as I have mentioned many times when I am guest on radio or television on COVID-19, I always mention that an informed public is COVID-19's worst enemy. No? So, informed public is one of the best ways to flatten that curve, right? So, how can you inform the public? No, so you can use social media. So I put here some of the social media portals. You have your Facebook here, you have your Twitter, Instagram, Viber, etc. No, so what you can do is to promote the science of preventing COVID-19, washing of hands, wearing of masks, yes, of course, distancing, staying home when you're sick, right? Doing self quarantine when you have symptoms, of course, having yourself tested, etc. No? We have to affirm the facts and debunk the myths. No? Announce new developments in COVID 19. More recently, we have the developments in vaccine phase trials. No? So some of the vaccines are now finished with phase 1 and 2 and are currently on phase 3 trials. No? We have to allay the public's fear and the public's apprehension of COVID-19. No? So we have to tell them that if we just follow the minimum health guidelines, no, or minimum health protocols, no, we can prevent or we can be protected against COVID-19. So these are just some of the ways to perform your duty, no, even though you are in the confines of your own home. So that ends my lecture on stakeholder engagement. The message really is that together, if we put all our skills together, we put all our resources together, we can achieve greater things. In the ROTC, the uniform service has a lot of resources, aside from manpower, which we can tap to help us achieve our goals, our goals of advancing the community. When we talk about the community uh, getting back up on its feet after being pushed down because of calamity and tragedy, we all of us, together can help uh, the citizens, again stand up and move forward. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you learned something from my lecture on civil military operations and how the uniformed services, and of course how as ROTC cadets, you can be of service to your country.
Maraming salamat po. That was Dr. Rodrigo Ong from Philippine Coast Guard Auxiliary.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ong, for that wonderful talk. If you have questions for Dr. Ong, we will be sending him your inquiries, okay? So you can just mention them in the chat box or perhaps via Q&A, or you can email us at NSTP email. Okay, so we now proceed to the question and answer. I would like to invite back our esteemed speakers kanina, right? So, andyan pa sila, ang mga nagpopogian at naggaganda ang mga speakers namin. Punta natin yung question number 1 natin. Okay, so the first question is, how can we motivate the students to be actively involved in community engagement projects in the new normal? And this is for RJ. Okay, RJ.
Hello po, magandang hapon ulit po sa lahat. So siguro I'd like to start off po by saying na naniniwala po ako na yung mga kabataan, yung mga estudyante po natin ay gustong-gustong tumulong, pero the problem is they don't know how. And the youth organizations that we work with in My Phrase Teacher are a testament to that innate quality of the youth to be of help. Our project actually opened opportunities for youth organizations and even the youth as a whole to step up, diba, and be of service to others, to harness that spirit of volunteerism among the members of their organization. And nakita po rin natin ngayon yan, di ba? Ngayon may pandemya tayong kinakaharap, may mga sakuna tayong kinakaharap na ang daming kabataan yung nag-show up, yung nag-step up para makatulong. So I think what we just need to do to motivate them is, I think first we need to expose them to what is happening around them. So imulat po natin sila dun sa mga problema where they can be a part of the solution. Magpakita po tayo ng examples of students helping out. Second is to provide them spaces and opportunities to actually help out. And these spaces and opportunities, hindi naman po kailangan na bago. Kasi pwedeng existing na po ito, tapos gusto lang po nating mag-build in o mag-build on dun sa existing na helping opportunity. So for example po in My Phrase Teacher, in Super Leader Squad, hindi naman po bago yung Marungko booklet. So we just built on what DepEd already had. And I think lastly and most importantly, as their teacher, as their instructors sa NSTP, we have to let them take ownership of how they will help out or of how they will help others. Let them decide how they can help kasi they are their own persons naman and we just need to trust their instincts, yung decision nila. Kasi ako, personally po, hindi po ako naniniwala na apathetic yung mga kabataan, yung mga estudyante natin. Siguro madali lang kami mga kabataan ma-frustrate na hindi nangyayari agad yung mga pagbabago na gusto nating mangyari, na hindi napapakinggan yung boses natin agad-agad. But imagine if we channel that frustration into action and we provide our students with opportunities where they can be of help. So yun po, I think expose them, provide them opportunities, and trust their instincts.
Okay, so ang ganda ng sinabi ni Chair RJ, no, na kailangan ma-empower ang mga estudyante. So siguro i-center ko yung attention din sa mga NSTP implementers na andito ngayong hapon na ito, na ang laki ng responsibility natin talagang mag-motivate ng ating mga estudyante, no? Nasa atin yung kakayahan, di ba, at kapangyarihan na mapagana kumbaga yung mga classrooms natin para mas makatulong tayo sa iba't ibang klase ng community sa panahon ng pandemya. So thank you, RJ. Next question, Sir Vani.
Okay po. Thank you, Sir Janelle. Thank you, Sir RJ. So sa pangalawang tanong po natin, how do we start with remote or blended community engagement projects? So what tools or platforms can we use in monitoring and evaluating the project? So siguro pwede pong i-continue ni Teacher RJ ang halimbawa or ang pagbibigay po ng konting kaalaman dito sa ating pangalawang tanong.
I think yung best starting ground po ay na-mention na rin po nung isa nating speaker, si JC po, is I think it's important that we start with having a dialogue or consultation with the community that we want to work with, because we want to start with what is strong in the community. And from that dialogue, dapat dun lalabas yung gap na gustong mapunan ng komunidad at hindi gusto nating mapunan ng komunidad. So as organizers of the project, parang tayo lang po yung magiging bridge nila. So mahalaga So I think mahalaga na meron po talagang tao on the ground, tao dun sa field para ma-establish yung relationship with the community. But also, pwede rin naman po na magkakalayo, pero dapat siguro connected through online platforms. Kasi po kami sa Super Leader Squad, layo-layo rin po kami. Ako po nasa Baler Aurora, yung iba ko mga kasamahan nasa Makati po, nasa Bulacan. But I think we were able to pull off naman yung My First Teacher through the power of social media. So, and I think that's also one platform that you can use in monitoring and evaluating your projects, yung social media po. So, nandyan yung Messenger siguro pag mag-message natin yung mga partners natin, yung Zoom kapag nag-meeting. And siguro when it comes to planning and monitoring, we can use spreadsheet, ganyan, online collaboration ng mga program management tools like Kanban, yung Microsoft To-Do List. So itong mga platforms na po ito, kahit layo-layo po yung mga estudyante natin, they can see the tasks, kung sino yung gagawa, kung saan gagawin. So, ayun po.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Teacher RJ.
Mhm.
So ito po ay isang malaking hamon dito sa ating mga participants, no? Lalong-lalo na yung mga NSTP implementers, mga instructors. Gaya na nabanggit ni Teacher RJ, no? Tayong mga kabataan ay may challenge upang maging adaptable dito sa mga teknolohiya at mga iba't ibang online platforms para maibahagi natin at tayo magkaroon pa ng ibang engagements, no? Na kahit sa ibang lugar dito sa ating komunidad or maging sa ibang lugar sa Pilipinas ay pwede natin ibahagi yung ating partisipasyon sa community engagement. Okay, salamat po, Teacher RJ.
Yes, so let's
So,
go to our
Sir Junel.
third question. So, para to kay JC naman. So, what can we do if our partner barangays do not support and cooperate with NSTP activities in the community? So, JC, anong pwede mong maipayo sa ating mga estudyante at kaguruan?
Hi. I think depende sa context kasi na pinanggagalingan ng barangay kung bakit hindi sila supportive or cooperative dun sa projects natin. But I think what I can share with you is baka nandun tayo sa consultation, nagka-problema. Kasi if we want to know ano ba yung interesting for the barangay, di ba? So what we can do is to do an early engagement talaga with the barangay officers or even the other leaders in the community for us to be able to determine ano ba yung root cause or ano yung problem within the community that we need to address before introducing ano yung gusto nating ma-address in the community. So napakahalaga talaga ng early engagement as RJ mentioned din nga kanina na napakahalaga na magkaroon muna ng dialogue para malaman na natin ano yung mga potential risk and threats na makikita natin with siguro stakeholder management kasi napaka-importante nun. Have to recognize ano yung power at play in the community, who holds the decision making, and at the same time sino nakaka-influence doon sa project natin in the community. So napakahalaga ng dialogue. And we have to recognize as well na the community members themselves are the experts of the issues related to them. So mahalaga na malaman natin yun namang galing sa kanila bago tayo mag-introduce ng project na gusto natin gawin for the community.
Okay. So ang ganda ng sinabi ni JC, no, na pag talagang galing, 'di ba, sa komunidad, yung solusyon din, 'di ba? Aside from dun sa mga issues na kinakaharap nila, yung solusyon, and most likely may welcoming arms, 'di ba, ang ating mga community sa ating mga proyekto. So thank you so much for that, JC. Sir Vani, ang next question natin ay para kanino?
Okay, ang susunod na tanong po ay siguro para kay JC rin po ito, no? So ang ating tanong po ay, do you have any recommended sectors or sector that we can work with for community engagement or community engagement projects? So is it possible to have tie-up projects with other NSTP classes or HEIs? So palagay ko dun sa ating Q&A box at sa chat box ay marami nang humihingi ng partnership or collaboration, no? So siguro pwede ring sagutin ito ng ating mga resource person. Sige po, Sir JC.
Actually, lalo na ngayong pandemya at marami ring calamities na tumama sa bansa natin. I think napakaraming sektor talaga yung pwede nating matulungan sa ngayon, especially on providing what is basic for them, lalo na ngayon na basic needs yung kinakailangan ng mga tao. So, pero for me, it's very possible na makapag-tie up kayo sa project with other NSTPs or HEIs. Pero aside from that, pwede rin kayo makapag-tie up sa existing organizations na meron na ring partnership sa communities. Kaya, yung like sinabi ni RJ din kanina, yung Super Reader Squad is one of the organizations na nag-welcome ng partnerships para makatulong sa sarili ninyong community or sa other communities. So you might want to explore that. And at the same time, siguro ako sa ngayon, since malapit ako sa sector ng education and you guys are, siguro may mga participants dito na NSTP students, I think something na very relatable sa inyo is makatulong sa mga kapwa niyo estudyante. So kung kayo may kapasidad kayo right now to participate in this kind of webinars and community engagement projects, might as well share ninyo kung ano yung matutulong ninyo sa other students na hirap maka-access ng ganitong klaseng opportunities para sa kanila. Yun po.
Okay. Salamat po, Sir JC. Siguro po, bigyan ko na rin ng pagkakataon si Sir RJ at mukhang marami pong naibahagi din tungkol sa partnership na maaaring makakolaborate together with other HEIs.
Yes, sir. Sige po.
Yes, sir.
For those who are interested po to work with us, you can email us at superreadersquad@gmail.com. So, i-chat ko na lang po ulit dito sa ating chat box para you can send your proposals po and then we can talk through email. Or pwede rin po actually sa Facebook. You can like and follow our page on Facebook at Super Reader Squad. So, maraming salamat po.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yung next question natin ay para kay Miss Pinona. Question number 5. What are the considerations in choosing an online community for community engagement? And how can we work with communities with little to no access to social media and technology? Ms. Winona.
I think first, in choosing a community, sa setting kasi natin ngayon, mahirap mag-establish pa ng trust with a community. So mahirap pumasok as someone who doesn't belong to a group or a community. Kaya I would advise na we choose a community na we are familiar with or malapit tayo. And doon naman sa pagpili ng online community for engagement, I think importanteng itanong anong klase ng access yung meron sila. Yung mga members ba ng community may access to stable internet that would enable them to do video calls? Pwede na rin kung ano yung platforms na meron like Zoom. Pero tanungin din natin, meron ba na ang access lang ay through text messaging, katulad ng mga dumagat sa sitio Anipa. So it's also important malaman kung ano yung limitations ng kanilang access because doon natin mapaparallel kung ano yung platforms na kailangan gamitin. But I would suggest talaga na kung ano yung community familiar sa atin at malapit, doon na lang. Kasi it's really difficult to establish at magsimula ng relationship in this setting.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Winona. So, siguro dagdagan ko yun ng konti, no, na importante talaga yung pagpaplano, no, yung pagbubusisi, kumbaga, na bago ka pumunta sa isang komunidad, talagang malalaman mo dapat kung may access nga ba sa teknolohiya, anong mga kapasidad ng mga tao, para akma sa kanila at sa kanilang konteksto yung mga pinaplano natin. So, thank you, Ms. Winona. Sir Vani, anong next question natin?
Okay, so ang ating pang-anim na tanong, how do we ensure the safety of NSTP students and instructors while implementing community engagement projects? Siguro ito po ay yung i-contextualize din natin dahil tayo po ay nasa remote at blended community engagement din. Or maaari din naman sa ibang komunidad na pinapayagan or may pagkakataon na sagawa ng mga proyekto yung mga ating mga estudyante at instructors. So siguro pwede natin i-continue rin through Ms. Winona ang tanong na ito.
Yeah, I think kadok din po nung una kong sagot na dun sa online engagement, hindi dapat dun natatapos. Kailangan nating harapin yung reality na we really have to send people to the community. So dito naman, we can observe safety and health protocols sa pamamagitan ng pag-select sino ba yung mga pwede talaga at physically fit na pumunta dun sa community. And of course, yung mga students and instructors, importante din hindi lang yung sarili nating safety, pero yung safety rin ng community yung iisipin. So we can ensure that sa pamamagitan ng pag-test muna sa mga sarili natin. I believe sa Mo Arena in Pasay, meron din libreng swabbing center. Makukuha agad yung results in 24 hours. At kailangan kasi pagdating mo doon, sigurado kang ang dadalhin mo ay yung proyekto at tulong, hindi virus. So, to ensure the safety, kailangan din natin, tanungin natin community kung okay ba sila na may mga tao, ibang tao na pupunta at bibisita sa kanila. Because it's important na alam din nila kung ano yung risk na kasama ng pag-implement ng projects.
Okay, salamat po. No? So magandang siguro guiding principle yun. Ano? Na sa kagustuhan nating tumulong sa mga komunidad, ay kailangan din natin alamin bukod sa ating safety at yung pagpapayag na magkaroon ng physical community engagement, ay kung naaayon din po ba yun sa ating mga regulasyon ngayon at kung nais din po ba ng komunidad na magkaroon ng ganong klaseng pagkakataon na pupuntahan sila. Okay, so siguro po we have our last question, Sir Junel.
Okay, so our last question ay para kay Franz. What are some virtual community engagements, do's and don'ts sa experience mo, Franz?
Siguro po, I can winnow it down to 6 points. The first is, we really need to know our audience and our platform. Sino po ba yung kausap natin? Kumusta yung internet nila? May internet ba sila? For example, if we're working with mothers sa community, yung oras, the time na gusto natin gawin yung activity nila, are they actually available for the said activity or busy sila sa childcare? So, kung naintindihan po natin yung audience at yung platform natin, kailangan tayo as the host of virtual community engagement activities, tayo yung mag-a-adjust. Second is, we need to be very clear kung ano nga ba talaga yung activity objectives natin, tsaka yung processes na gagamitin natin para ma-meet yung objectives. Ang gagawin ba natin? Is it a training? Is it a discussion? Will we be organizing group activities? Coming from that, yung mga proseso na gusto nating gawin, do they easily translate online? For example, kaya bang magpa-group activity through webinars? So sa Zoom pwede, may mga breakout rooms, pero user-friendly ba yon sa mga participants natin? Makakasigurado ba tayo na hindi mawawala yung ating mga participants once you split them to breakout rooms tapos we ask them back to go back to the main plenary discussion group? So, kailangang mag-aakma again yung ating objective, yung processes doon sa platform na gagamitin natin. That's the second one. Number 3 is we need to open the platform. Bilang host, hindi lang tayo yung responsable sa pag-maintain at pag-nurture ng platform for our virtual community engagement. Yung participants, kasama din, kailangan active din yung kanilang participation. So we need to make the participants equally responsible in maintaining the platform. So yung house rules sa simula na kung saan nag-establish tayo na ano yung mga kailangang sundin ng lahat, importante yon. At yung pag-i-invite natin sa mga participants for feedback, importante yun kasi kumbaga, sabay kayong nagko-communicate, nagbibigay ng idea while you're having the discussion, while you're having the training. Number 4 is be prepared for trolls, hackers, hecklers, etc. etc. Dahil virtual yung you're using virtual platforms, expect na whether it's FB, live stream, or Zoom webinar, maya-maya may instances where people will post inappropriate questions or comments. So these are disruptors. So best not to engage with these individuals, but at the same time, kailangan prepared ka rin kung how do you protect your other participants from these disruptors. So yun yung number 4. Number 5, expect technology to fail you. As in, siguro naman sa mga nakaraang buwan, lahat tayo ay nakaranas na bigla tayong nawawala sa Zoom calls, biglang hindi available ang ating internet, mahina, etc., etc. Biglang nag-brown out, kaya hindi ka napuputol ka sa discussion. So kung ganon, if technology would definitely fail you, kailangan mag-prepare ka ng plan B, plan C, plan D. At the same time, you need to prepare your participants for the failures in technology. And tulungan mo rin silang mag-shift doon sa plan B, plan C, plan D kapag nag-shift kayo. So may mga karanasan kami before na meron kaming large scale seminar being done via Zoom. Tapos yung mga kausap namin, sobrang hina ng internet, kahit audio calls na napuputol sila. So ano yung gagawin mo? Ano yung ginawa? Ano yung kailangan mong gawin para tuloy pa rin yung discussion? So kailangan prepared ka as a host at piniprepare mo rin yung participants doon sa shift to the next plan. And lastly, siguro, importante na we need to make the virtual space a fun and engaging platform. Kailangan yung mga webinars na ina-organize natin, yung mga pag-uusap na ganito, ay engaging, meron natututuhan ng mga tao. Kasi nakikita natin paulit-ulit na babalik at babalik ang mga tao sa mga ganitong platforms kapag nakikita nila na makabuluhan siya, may natutunan sila at na-meet yung objectives na sinet nyo sa simula't simula. Hindi ka babalik sa isang webinar na kung saan super bored ka unless for compliance. But since we're talking about community engagement and we want to engage ideas, engage participation, kailangan yung space na kini-create natin allows for that kind of feeling and for that kind of connection sa ating participants. Yun lamang po. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat sa iyo, Franz. Okay, so marami pong mga katanungan siguro kayo sa inyong mga isip, no? So baka pwede nyo ma-contact itong ating mga speakers, si Miss Winona, si Miss Franz, si JC, si RJ, tsaka si Dr. Ong, sa mga hinaharap. Okay, may mga nakikita ako nagko-comment sa ating Q&A tsaka sa chat na kung pwede maimbitahan sila sa kanilang mga eskwelahan, so pwede nyo pong kausapin itong ating mga speakers. Okay? Ipa-flash po namin ang evaluation form, di ba? So pwede niyo po itong picturean at puntahan sa online, okay? Para po magkaroon kayo ng pagkakataon, makapagbigay ng komento sa mga naganap ngayong hapon na ito, okay? So the evaluation form will be accepting responses until December 8, Tuesday, 5 p.m., okay? So please double check your certificate details before submitting your response. So kailangan po namin itong evaluation na ito para kumbaga mabigyan din namin kayo ng sertifiko sa hapong ito. Okay? So on that note, pupunta tayo sa pinakahuling bahagi ng ating programa, ang closing remarks ng Deputy Director ng NSTP Diliman Office, si Assistant Professor Giovanni Francis A. Legaspi.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Sir Junel. So sa pagtatapos po ng ating talakayan o webinar tungkol sa Reimagining Community Engagement para sa NSTP implementers, faculty at students, so kami po ay nagpapasalamat sa inyong lahat sa pagdalo at sa pakikibahagi sa isang makabuluhan na diskusyonan. Pagtutulong-tulungan po natin lahat ito para harapin ang panibagong hamon o opportunity, no, sa pagsasagawa ng remote and blended community engagement para sa NSTP, maging CWTS, LTS at ROTC. So sa hapon ito ay nabigyan ng paliwanag ang fundamentals of remote blended community engagement. So isang mahalagang natutunan natin ay let's meet where the people are. So meron pong naibahagi dito tungkol sa 5 A's. At isa pa pong pagbabahagi ay ang pag-advocate, pag-connect at pag-support. At let's listen to the community na napaka-importante. We ask questions on why, what, and how do we continue remote and blended community engagement. So we have to innovate. We have to look at effective use of our resources. We have to look at replicability. And of course, the impact of how we can continue an inclusive and sustainable partnership with the community. So, importante rin po magkaroon tayo ng alternatibo or mga plans sa B, C at D at kung ano pa pong plano. At mahalaga rin na tignan natin kung paano tayo mag-shift, no, sa iba't ibang modes of delivery at ang pag-implement ng mga programa. So, importante rin po tignan natin dito na isa sa mga takeaway ay kailangan ay maging masaya, maging fun at educational at engaging yung ating magiging partnership at ang pagtutulungan na nais nating mabuo. So, sa kabuuan ng mga participants para sa ating webinar sa hapon na ito ay meron po tayong about 1,020 attendees, no, both from YouTube at sa ating Zoom. Maraming salamat po at ito po ay mula sa nag-register na participating schools. So, meron po tayo 181 SUCs at HEIs na dumalo sa webinar na ito. So isang pagpapatunay na lahat tayo ay nagkakaisa sa pagpapatuloy ng remote and blended community engagement para sa NSTP. So isang malakas na palakpak po para sa inyong lahat. At sana po ay marami tayong natutunan na pamamaraan at panibagong pananaw sa remote community engagement. Tayo po ay mag-consult, mag-involve at mag-collaborate, sabi nga ni Sir JC, no, upang maisagawa natin ang makabuluhan at ang layunin ng NSTP para sa ating mga estudyante at komunidad. So dahil po sa remote at blended community engagement, we can now collaborate and partner with almost everyone in many different ways. So sa ngalan po ng mga naging resource persons natin sa hapon na ito, sa webinar natin, si Ms. Fran Jimenez, Sir JC Pineda, Ms. Winona Galvez, Sir RJ at si Dr. Ong. At syempre po sa inyong lahat na kasama na pagpapatuloy ng layunin ng NSTP, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. So mula sa UP Diliman, sa ngalan po ng UP Diliman Chancellor Fidel Nemenso, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs Maria Teresa Payong-Ayong, mula sa UP Diliman Interactive Learning Center at ang kanilang staff sa pamumuno ni Director Lorely Grepo Halaw, ang UP Diliman NSTP staff, siyempre po, at sa pamumuno rin ni Director Junel Labor, kami pong lahat ay nagagalak sa pagtulong sa inyong lahat at willing na tumulong pa sa hinaharap. Ako po si Giovanni Legaspi mula sa NSTP, NSRC, na nagpapasalamat sa inyong lahat. Hanggang sa muli nating pagkikita na virtual at sana ay di na magtagal, no, at magkita-kita po tayong lahat sa physical na kaanyuhan at para sa pagpapatuloy ng community engagement ng NSTP. So muli, maraming salamat po. Mabuhay ang NSTP at mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Sa iba kundi sa iyo at sa akin ang simula ng pagbabago. Panahon na para bumangon at paikutin muli ng tama ang mundo. Suliranin ng ating lipunan, unti-unting magagawan ng paraan. Sa bagong siglo na ito ng ating mga buhay, tayo'y magsama-sama. Bigyang liwanag ang daan, maging gabay sa lipunan, kailangan ng iyong kamay.
Halika na kapwa Pilipino, halika na kapwa isko at iska.
Taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sarap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Panibagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo. Ang armas mo ay ang iyong natutunan laban sa karahasan. Ang iyong sandata ay serbisyong sasakip sa mamamayan mula sa kahirapan. Halika na, kapwa mandirigma, magtagumpay kapwa SCOTS ka. Taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sa harap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Panibagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sa harap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay taas kamay ang mga bagong bayani, sa harap ng pagsubok, huwag kang susuko. Bigyan ng boses ang sigaw ng masa, ang bagong pag-asa ay, ang bagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Panibagong pag-asa ay mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo, mula sa'yo. Umiasa sa iba kundi sa'yo at sa akin ang simula ng pagbabago.